Oh, it's time to launch your game. This is one of the scariest times as a game developer. We have a saying that the last 10% of game development takes 80% of the work, and it's often true. And the reason is a lot of things have been put into the game, and they work when you play them the way they're supposed to. But when you don't know how they're supposed to, like most players, because they haven't seen the game before, or you're not playing it the way you intend, things break and things don't happen the way they want. And people can get stuck, or they can lose their saves, or all sorts of things bad for the player can happen that weren't really as much of the focus on creating that entertainment in the first place. And so it becomes that moment when a date has been set that we're going to be done. I will tell you that this is one area where I think the film industry in general does better than the game industry. They typically finish their film and then pick a date. At least the film principal photography. And there'll be craziness on the post-production and the editing as well. But often, there'll be enough time there where there's a gap between the product they worked on and when it releases. We are very expensive at all times as a game industry, because we're employing our people at all times. The film brings people on, they work on a project, they leave, they go work on another project, they leave. We're not like that. So we tend to try and make our ship date as close to when we think it will be done as we can, because otherwise it costs us a lot of money for people to be working on the next game when we don't even have the money from the first game yet. And so it's a tough economic problem, and that tends to drive us towards picking dates that sometimes are too optimistic or too aggressive, and the what we call discovered work. There's work we planned, and then there's the discovered work. As you start working on those things you planned, sometimes discovered work really grows. Most developers I know assume that if I pick a task and I give it amount of time, that the amount of discovered work is 50% more, because just the way you think it's going to work isn't always the way it's going to work, even if it's an engine you're familiar with, say Unity or Unreal, just because of the way you work with other people, or the way that they've architected a certain feature to do a certain thing. Now that you need to do this other thing, it may not work out in the way you want at all. And so predicting the time of when you're done is probably one of the hardest things in game development overall. And picking a date and having that launch date happen then becomes an acceleration of that really difficult process, because now we have committed to releasing for our customers that this game is going to come out on this date, and we are in a situation where we may not still always even be able to predict, even if it's only a few months or several months away, we may not be as good at predicting the last things we need to do to get there. Some people decide to do something called crunching, where they work inordinate hours and they just work harder to try and get it all done in that time. And as a person who's done that many years ago, I've learned both from myself and from being able to watch tremendous number of other developers, I can say it doesn't really work. It has such a great cost in people, burnout, anger, emotion, frustration, and it actually doesn't give you the results that you want. A human being working more than, say, 16 hours in a day, to try and get 2 8-hour days in, doesn't do 2 8-hour days. They do an 8-hour day, and then maybe they do a couple hours work in those next 8 hours. And maybe during those next 8 hours, they introduce so many new bugs and so many new problems that your discovered work goes way up, because you have to fix the problems from people working so long and so late. So in my experience, I will say that crunch actually doesn't work. Especially not extended crunch, for more than a few days or anything like that. And I know companies and people who've worked 6 days a week for 6 months, and then 7 days a week for 6 months. And it's just, human beings aren't designed to do that. They're not efficient. They don't continue to work at the same level of efficiency and the same level of quality. and the number of problems you introduce really is equal to the amount of savings you're trying to get. So I would, as a developer, not recommend crunch. It doesn't get you what you want. What you want is to have the best possible game on the date you've picked. And really what that means is prioritizing and actually changing scope. And that's why you have to be careful up front about what all features you're telling somebody your game is going to have. Of course you want all those features in. Of course we're going to make all of those features until you get to the end and you realize I actually don't have time to make that feature or that feature. And as long as you've made a game that can entertain people and have enough quality entertainment before you get to the point where you announce your date, you're going to be okay. Yeah, you have all these things you want to be in the game, but not all of them are going to fit. And so you start doing what we call, both for bugs and for features, triage. Triage obviously coming from a medical way of going, who can I save? Who can't I save? But what it becomes is you look at every feature that's left to be done, or every polished task that's left to be done, or every bug that needs to be fixed, and you go, should I or should I not? And for the things that you just can't do, you move them to later. And that later might be a DLC package. It might be an update that might be free. These days, supporting a game after it launches is far more common and prevalent because of so many games being as a service. And even games that aren't as a service have started to have now consumer expectations that they behave a little bit as a game of a service. And so we're getting to an interesting time with customer expectations of how many updates are happening, or how much time after a game is shipped will things change, or will new content appear. And if a game is successful, it's pretty easy to continue to have people assigned with that title and continue to support it, continue to add features, continue to add content. But if a game is not successful, if it doesn't make enough money, or if it just barely breaks even, you probably don't want to continue doing development on it, because you're throwing away the money that you would use for a new game that hopefully would be successful. And this is a difficult thing because we all passionately love the products we make. And when our players come and love the products back, it feels so good. It is so enriching as a developer to have people love your game. The hard part is for your game to be financially successful, more than a certain number of those people have to love your game. And if you only have a certain number of people loving your game and it's not enough, the love is still there both ways, but the business necessity of continuing doesn't continue. You are told you really can't continue on that game. Otherwise, you're just paying more money to make their game better and losing that money. And that's not a good business. And it doesn't mean that you'll be able to stay in business and make more games. So as a game developer, you want to work on games that you hope will be successful enough such that the audience response will cover your costs. And if it does, you can continue to engage with that audience. And that's the goal. So once a date is picked, then it's really about scoping your tasks properly, keeping your people healthy so that they are efficient, so that they do good work. Because if you burn through your people, not only are they not going to do the work that you hoped by burning through them and pushing them to work so hard, but then they're probably not going to stay with you afterwards and become good long-term parts of your company that really get to know how things work. One of the things I love about Hidden Path Entertainment and the company that we have is that we tend to work really well together. We've built a really efficient team that kind of knows each other well. As we add people, they become part of the team, but we work hard to stay with the people to, empower them to do good work and not burn them out so that they stay at the company a long time. Because the longer they stay at the company, if they're doing great work, the better we're all going to be together and the more things we can do. So we really try and think about the long term, even when you have short-term deadlines. So scoping your project and taking care of the people are really two of the very most important things you can do once you've picked, you've hit your feature spot, you pick a date, and you're coming in to try and ship that game. And that can be counterintuitive. People often think, now we push, now we burn. And humans are naturally going to do that. Everyone's going to focus. Everyone's going to get more serious because everyone on the team wants the game to be the best it can be. That's typically what happens at game development companies. There's a lot of passion, a lot of caring. You almost never run into anybody who, however, it just doesn't happen in the game industry. And often it's because people can make more money doing other things. So they're in the game industry, still making good money, depending upon the company they work at, but not the most money they could make because their passion lies in the product. And so they're going to be passionate in the product. And as a leader, if you're running a team, sometimes actually the best leadership you can do is to hold people back and say, look, you're working too much. Go home, rest, see your family, take a couple days, come back refreshed, dive in. You'll get the best work that way. And it seems really counterintuitive, but sometimes the breaks people have on that time between setting your date and releasing can be the most valuable things, as opposed to the crunch days you have. I know it doesn't seem, super intuitive, but 25 years of experience of doing this tells me that's the right way to do it. You really need to support your team, and you support your customers and your players afterwards. Even if you're not in the position where you can present to them more content or a lot of feature updates, it's really good if you can, and when you're planning your game out, to plan some number of months of fixing bugs and responding to issues for your players, and then being able to at least listen to them and tell them they are heard. Sometimes you can't fix everyone's problem. Sometimes the bugs that they want or the features they want would take months and months, and you don't have the resources to do that. But at least responding to everyone who communicates with you, whether it's on a forum or whether it's on a Discord chat or whether it's by email, being able to say, hey, we hear you. Yeah, we wish we could have done that too. Doesn't look like it's coming at this time. We'll let you know if it is. Yeah, they may not be happy in that moment, but they were heard and they were respected. And that relationship between you as a game development company and the customers, at least acknowledging their existence and what they want, even if you can't give them what they want, has value. You will get a lot of people who are always upset that you didn't make the perfect game for them. That just happens. And that's because the players are as passionate as you about games, but their passion isn't always in making a game that's for a large number of people. Their passion is making a game that fits exactly what they want. And those things sometimes work together, especially if you can build a well-balanced system, but sometimes they don't. Sometimes your game has features that are for a large number of different audiences, and some of those features are for the person contacting you, but some of them aren't, and that's okay. In addition, if you're making a game for a console, this path of picking your date, finishing your date, and releasing gets more complicated, because the consoles and even some of the mobile phone folks have certifications where they check your game to make sure it doesn't do things that is wrong for the platform. And what they might determine is wrong for the platform might go into far more detail and far more nuance than maybe seems right to you as a first-time console developer or a first-time mobile developer. You may go through 2 or 3 rounds of certification where you submit to them and they come back and they say, look, these things aren't working. Don't submit until they are. You do, and then they come back and say, oh yeah, and these other things are wrong. You'd like to get everything first, and they try to do that, but it doesn't always happen that way because different people have different interpretations of rules. So if you're making a console title as well, you need to finish much, much earlier than you think, have the time to go through console certification as well as your bug fixing and time. And usually console certification comes after the bug fixing, but you need to allow time for it. And that can be months in and of itself. So sometimes you might feel like my game is pretty much done, but I can't pick a date to release it for another 6 months because we have all these bugs we need to fix. We have these features we need to polish. We need to go through final testing to make sure everything's working when you're not playing the game right. And we have to go through console certification, and we might have to go through it a couple times. And so that's why as players, we often are waiting for games, even if the developer says, yeah, we think we're done. And then you find out, well, maybe we're not done, because different, games have different challenges. If I'm making a role-playing game, I probably have a lot more time of testing to do because of all of the possible things that can happen in a player, clap into a player, than I do if I have a first-person shooter online game. I still might have a long time on the first-person shooter, but the things that I'm going to find are much more consistent. They're much more repeatable. I'm going to run into them more often than, say, the particular quest line after you've gotten this item, before you get that item, only time that this bug happens, say in a role-playing game, or a strategy game might be somewhere in between. So different genres of games have different amounts of work to do to finish the games as well. So if you're coming in to land your game, landing is the scariest part of a flight. It's the scariest part of building a game, and you have to really be very methodical and very organized, even if your development up to that point wasn't as organized. One other thing that happens, and I'll mention it just as well, is that often people want to have their game release in multiple languages. It's what we call localization, so that the game sounds right to the people playing it in many different areas. Often you don't want to do localization until all your voiceover or your writing is complete. And often your voiceover and your writing isn't complete until you've kind of gotten to that point at the end of the game. So sometimes coming in for a landing for your game not only involves really advanced testing, console certification, but it also involves the translation and re-recording for VO of all the languages that you want to ship on, if you're all going to ship on them on the same date. Sometimes it's just too hard to do that, and so some games will release their native language version first, and then do the other languages as they can, as the localization happens. But trying to finish the play and the entertainment and the reason we made the game is hard in and of itself. Then trying to turn it into a product that will work for everybody, that people will love, that will be reliable and will behave the way they expect, be in the language they expect, and be compatible with the platform's rules, the way the platform has set them up. That part itself can take a long time and feel like it's different than this creating of entertainment that you want to do as a game developer. But it's extremely important for the people who are going to enjoy your game and enjoy your product. I hope this helps.